All right, so this is Crash Course 3 for ProffieOS4. So the official release 4.5 is now out. Frederick is working on the style editor, but it's not ready yet. There's actually a lot to add, so I know he's working on it, but it may take a little bit of time. But in the interim, the concepts and stuff we can still cover. So I wanted to kind of do that because I've had questions, particularly PreOn seems to be really popular right now, so I'm going to mostly focused to that, but a lot of the concepts will carry over to other effects. So first and foremost, I kind of want to touch on shapes and what shapes are. And once you kind of understand them, a lot of other stuff will make more sense. And then I'm going to also touch a little more on transitions again, because basically the combination of transitions and shapes is what makes a lot of those PreOn effects possible. And I think that's where I seem to get the most questions. So I figure probably easier to answer stuff in a video. And then this way people can kind of learn on their own and refer to it. So basically, shapes actually started in 3.9, and some of you may have used them, but if you haven't used them or if you're not familiar with them, the current editor, and again, when this editor updates to the support 4.5, a lot of this stuff will be simpler, but for the concept, we can use editor, and you can play with editor to see how shapes work, but the implementation is different in 4.5, just in terms of how you use them. But so there's two basic shapes, and all the shape is in Proffie is it's a change in color. So or it's an object that's different from the rest of the blade. So in this case here, and mix is how you're going to have to use it in the 3.9 editor. And 4.5, there's actually a second implementation using the layers, but obviously the editor doesn't support it, but the syntax is similar. So all this is a mix just takes some value and puts colors together. So in this case, this mix of red and blue is using what's called a bump. So a bump is one of the two shapes we're going to talk about. All a bump is it's a group of pixels somewhere on the blade with a certain, so it has a center point and then it has a width. And a bump will have a gradient as it changes transition. So you can kind of see here. So this bump, and if you're not familiar with the numbering, the integers for OS4 for Proffie in general, it's really pretty simple. 0, any value of 0 is going to be the hilt. So 0 is the hilt. And then the highest number, and this is in all the documentation, and it's also up here, 32,768 is the tip. So in terms of shapes, when it asks you for the location, you can do any number in between 0 and 32,768. So obviously half of 32,768 is 16,384. So that's for the middle. All right. So all the first integer in a bump is the center point. It's actually the center. So you don't have to know, it's not a specific pixel. It's the center of your blade. So whatever length your blade is, if by putting 16,384 in, if you put your blade length in correctly in your config, then it's going to show up in the center of your blade. If you have the blade length wrong in your config, then you'll have other issues like drag and stab and melt won't show. But then also your center wouldn't be aligned. So that's, if you do this on your blade and you put 16,384 in and you want it in the center and it's not centered, that means your blade length is wrong. But so at any point. So then the second number, the bump width, this is just how big you want it to be. And the bump acts a little different than the other shapes. So the bump creates a gradient that is part of it. So it'll have a starting center, but then it creates a gradient out. So it blends to the other areas. So it might be a little hard to see, but the actual width of this bump is about 50% of the blade. 1600 is not quite that, but it's about 50%. But what you're going to get is you're going to get a gradient point. So it's not blue being a hard blue for half 50% of the blade. It's blue fading to red for 50% of the blade. So when you use the bump, you're going to get that fading effect in there. But you can change these values. So, and I'll change them here just for the tool. So if I make this twice as big, you'll see it's a much larger area. It's almost taking over that full blade. But again, the blue shows up in the center, and then it gradients out. So one of the shapes you can use is a bump, and that you can put anywhere. So you can move. So in particular, and this goes for a number of effects, you can use a bump to create. There's actually both shapes work for this, but certain styles I use a bump because I prefer the gradient from the bump, and certain styles I use the other one, which we'll get to in a minute. But so say you wanted to add an emitter effect, you can actually just move this to 0. And now that's my emitter having a blue color on a red blade. So the first one here is that, and the mix isn't as important because this is, again, old syntax, but the shape is what I'm really talking about. So, and then you'll see it has the 3200. Now the bump, having it center at 0, the gradient's going this way. There's actually, theoretically, also a gradient going that way, but it's not visible on the blade. So, so if you notice that it's only doing here, that's because it's taking its center at 0 and it's splitting. So if you wanted to make that even larger, you could increase this number. We'll go. And these are obviously very large numbers, but this would then make that gradient fill out to almost a whole blade. So one of the first shapes you'll see and use is the bump. And the bump basically has two values. It's going to have the center, which is the first value in its template. So bump, center. This one has a center at 0. And then the size or width. And again, it has that gradient effect going to it. The second of the shapes that you can use is a SmoothStep. And in the editor, the SmoothStep has some signs added to it, which is a different function. We'll get to functions in a future crash course, but I set this one up. So SmoothStep can have a fade, but it can also have a hard edge. So in this case, we're using a mix, the same kind of mix, but I'm using SmoothStep. And the SmoothStep has also two values. It has the position, which is where you want that SmoothStep to begin, but then it also has the step width. And if you set the step width to 0, essentially you get this hard edge. So if you wanted to create like a hard edge of two colors like we saw up here, you can set your step width to 0, and it basically creates 0 gradient. So just red, blue. Now, SmoothStep also has the ability to take negatives. So say I wanted to flip these colors for whatever reason, you can put in even just a -1. Oops. And what it's going to do is it's going to flip. So on this one, by going -1, I get, and I'm getting essentially a 1 out of 362 gradient. So it's going to be pretty negligible on your blade. But blue now will be by the hilt and red is by the tip. But then if I go and flip back to a 0 or 1 or anything, you'll see those colors change. So negatives just change where the SmoothStep, the direction the SmoothStep goes. The position value is where it takes place. And now if you want to see how that works with a gradient, so if I open this up to say 10,000, you'll see that it's giving me a gradient area, but that SmoothStep still takes place right now at that center point. Now you again can use a SmoothStep. SmoothStep you'll see in drag, melt, and stab a lot because the direction of it actually goes towards the hilt by default. So if I move this guy out to say 30,000, that's going to create that blue tip, and we'll want to open that up a bit. Let's bring it up higher. Oh, it's moving too much of a blend. Let's go to a harder edge. So there, so the larger number is creating a gradient to stretch longer, so I wanted to go the other direction and shrink it. But that's how you would create it here. Now, if you wanted to take this and use it on the emitter, which I do for certain effects. Certain effects have the bump, certain effects will have a SmoothStep. They're both shapes, it's just how you use them. What you'll see for the ones who I move to the emitter is you're going to end up with the hilt will be the position will usually be maybe like a 4,000. It depends on the effect, but 4,000, 6,000, or something like that. And then you go to the negative for the second value, and that means that I will be flipping. So I will then have it starting at the 4,000 location, and then the fade is a negative 1,000, so then it's going that direction. So those are your two shapes in terms of, particularly again, PreOn effect and setting up for that. So you're gonna, when you're looking in styles and you want to see the shape, and basically the shape is any portion of the blade that is lit differently from the entirety. So a shape gets, and with layers, a shape basically lays on top of a base layer, which is a full blade. But in the mix, it actually just takes those two colors and uses it for that. So in the editor, you're going to use the mix. In the nearly all of the styles for OS 4.5, there's going to be a few implementations depending on the style itself. But primarily for PreOns, it's going to be in the transition effect, you will see an alpha L. And what that is it's an alpha layer, and I'm going to show that. So we'll go here, and I'm just going to quickly build a style in my library with a PreOn. So PreOn, I'm just going to grab one of these. So that, and I'm going to leave everything else the same. Just for our purposes, I'll get style, go into editor and paste it. And then this is from the other videos, but if you want to see how to break this stuff apart, you're looking for your opening brackets typically, or commas. So here, the base, so I've got layers, that's my base color, and it's there. And then, as we said in the previous video, the comma and transition effect L, or comma and responsive, that's makes up like 90-something% of the styles that are built. So we'll break out the transition effect. I've got responsive lockup, responsive lightning block, responsive blast, responsive clash, responsive drag, responsive melt. And then in-out TRL we also talked about in the previous video. Transition effect, and that should be the end of it. So, okay, so, and this is, again, more just kind of a reinforcement for if you're doing this by hand code. So what we're looking for is the effect PreOn and the transition effect that runs it. So the effect PreOn is here, and then the transition effect is here. Now, again, as we covered in transitions in the last video, TR concat is what makes those transition effects able to do colors. And you'll see here, and let me break this out. This is what we're looking at. And then we will, let's move you. So this is the alpha layer. So the alpha layer, or alpha L in OS 4.5, is how you create shapes not using a mix. So you can use the mix, but the mix is going to be for your base layer. If you're layering on top of it, if you threw a mix in here, what's going to happen is you're going to create a new base layer. So with layers, and I think I covered this in the first video, you really want only one solid base layer, which is that very first layer. Then everything above it should be some layer style, which all of them will have the L in them. So you don't want to take a base layer of a blade and then stick a blast, just a regular blast, clash, mix, or anything like that on top of it, because essentially you're not actually doing layers in that case, which is where I think some people are running into issues when they're trying to take their old styles and then stick it in layers and do stuff. They work differently and they're designed differently. So you want, if you're using layers, you want to really use any of the effects with any of the styles with an L in them on top of it. So you have your base, which can be regular, and this you can fill out how you want. So you can have a mix as your base layer, and you can have all kinds of things built into that base layer, but your second, third, fourth, all your other layers above that need to have the L in them for it to technically do what it's meant to do. And that's because they have to have some level of transparency for the effects below them to show through. So an alpha layer, if you know anything, Photoshop or any of those graphical programs, alpha is just a level of transparency. So an alpha layer has a level of transparency inherent to it. How that is controlled, though, is actually with the shape. You can do other things. So there's functions and stuff. And again, that's kind of future. So for our purposes, again, mostly focusing PreOn, we're going to talk about shapes. So alpha layer. So this transition effect, and I went on a tangent. So let me reset. So effect PreOn is what I'm looking at. That's a transition effect is what does that. The TR concat is a combination of transitions and colors, or in this case, this is an alpha layer, which is a color. And that alpha layer is made up of color, which is here. And again, in layers, I'm using the hump flicker, but I'm using the L version. So if you just put the regular hump flicker here, it's in some cases with an alpha L, you could get away with it, but best practice is going to be to put the L version. There are some scenarios where you can get away with using the old syntax, but it's kind of dependent upon what you're actually trying to accomplish. But at any rate, so we've got the hump flicker. So the color of it is a hump flicker red with, that's just the intensity of the hump flicker, or the hump size of the hump flicker. And then you'll see our bump, which we just talked about. So this bump is what we're looking for if you want to change the size of that emitter effect that's happening in the PreOn. So I did choose the overload PreOn. What that is it's going to be a buildup of energy at your emitter. And the bump is set to 0, which is the hilt. And the size of it, and there's actually several sizes in this particular one, but the size is here. So if you wanted to make that bump smaller, I would decrease that number. That second number being the size. First number in bump is location, second number is size. So if you want to shrink it, so some people have like the windows cut out in their emitter, if they're hilt, and they only want the PreOns to appear in there. If it's bleeding out above that, you would just reduce this number. Now, if you happen to have a blade that's set really deep in the hilt and you're not seeing it, you would increase this number. But so you're going to look for the bump. Now, again, SmoothStep is also used in some instances, so you may look for SmoothStep. But what you're looking for changing the size on PreOn effects is here. Now, this PreOn overload has several stages to it. So you'll see transition effect, TR concat, it does a fade. This is your timing. So for those of you who, if you remember in the first video, the PreOns are all pretty much defaulted out to 8,000 milliseconds. Some of them are 7,950, but 8,000 roundabout. So that 8,000 milliseconds is made up of all the transitions within. So there's a 2,000 millisecond fade to this alpha layer, which is a hump flicker with a bump, which is only going to affect your emitter. Your second fade is here of 2950. So that means as of right now, this transition effect is running for 4950. So if I wanted to cut the time, I would cut it there. And then my second bump is here. So it goes from a 4,000 size, it grows a little bit to 5,000, and it's meant to be a small growth because of how I'm timing it out. But again, you would increase that number there. And again, this is because this is a compound PreOn, but you can increase the number there for size if you need to, decrease it if you need to. And then we've got a 3,000 millisecond fade, and then another alpha layer, and then here's my other bump. So then this bump goes to 6,000. So again, if you wanted to change it, you're looking, so if you want to change size of something, you're looking for these bumps or SmoothStep, and you're looking for the second value in them, which is the size. So this one goes from 4,000, 5,000, 6,000. So that's that buildup of it. It's actually the same effect, but I do increase the hump flicker intensity on purpose. So you'll see it goes 10, 15, 20. And then the timing. So getting back to our timing. So the timing on this PreOn effect is 2,000 plus 2,950 plus 3,000 and then plus 1,000. So TR Boeing runs for 1,000. It does 3 bounces. So if I wanted to say increase the length of the animation, you can increase any of the numbers, but what you'd want to do, and mine are timed out to the PreOn file I had in testing. So the intervals are based on when the sound intensifies. but you could change one of them or all of them, but it's the cumulative addition of these transitions that make up the length that it shows. Now, if you need to reduce it, so say you have a really short PreOn effect, and this effect is showing after your blade ignites, which does happen because of how the alpha layers have to be layered, you would decrease these. But so for changing up your PreOns, which is the question I seem to be getting pretty consistently, which is great. Everybody is having fun with them, but they are made to be long on purpose, just so that you can see them. But you can increase them even further. Some people have heard they actually have even longer PreOns that they want to do. So you would just increase these timings of these transitions. And I've had people who say they want to shrink them, so you would just reduce the times. And again, it's cumulative. So you would reduce. So say I want to cut this in half, I would go cut this down, cut that down, cut that down, and then lastly cut this down. And you don't, you don't have to. You could leave if you like that last bit being there, you would there. But then you would add these up. So I have a 1,000, so 2450, 3950, 4950 now is going to be how long that's going to run for. So that's how you change the timings. And then again, the main focus being the shapes. If you want to change your sizes of what's going on, you're looking for these bumps. Or so, again, some of the other PreOns will use SmoothStep. But SmoothStep's same thing. You would just change that second value. But so that's how you change for PreOns and other shapes. So if you see bump or SmoothStep anywhere in a style, and that style is only showing on part of a blade, that's what's controlling it, is the shape of the bump or SmoothStep. But for so you'll see them sprinkled throughout, but for the most part, what people are running and asking about has been the PreOn effect so far. Post-off is the same. So if you have an effect retraction, so there's some post-off effects now. Actually, it's the same exact thing. It's just a different use, but it's going to be SmoothStep and bump that you're looking for. And again, first value in either SmoothStep or bump is the location. 0 is the hilt. 32,768 is the tip. Anywhere in between obviously falls as a percentage of the blade. And then the second variable is going to be the size of it. And you increase the size or decrease the size, and that'll change how that shape looks on your blade. So hopefully that helps. I hope to get a couple more videos done, but part of me is almost waiting for Frederick to finish the editor, because a lot of the stuff I have to talk about is conceptual. So without being able to show you guys visually, it makes it a little harder to explain some of the stuff, particularly functions, which functions are probably going to be several videos themselves, just because that's almost a whole new world. It's what enables pretty much all of the really cool stuff that people see in OS 4.5, but there's a lot going on with those. So functions will be probably I won't be able to touch them until the editor is able to support them, just because conceptually just words on a piece of on a word pad doesn't help explain what's going on for people. So, but hopefully this helps, particularly again PreOn effects, any of those. So emitter effects, any emitter effects, post off, PreOn. I also have the emitter effects themselves that are active. You're going to use the bump or the SmoothStep. That's how that's accomplished, and you can control any of the values you want. So hopefully this helps, and good luck and enjoy. And now that 4.5 is out there, I know editor's not there yet, but just start playing with some ideas and styles, and see what this thing can really do. So more to come.